I think the worst part isn't that I lost everything. It's that I was exactly the kind of person who should have seen it coming. I spent 40 years as a chartered accountant. I've audited companies. I've caught fraud. I've sat across from business owners and told them their partner was stealing from them. I know every trick in the book, and yet when it was my own life, my own money, my own heart on the line, I missed every single warning sign, or maybe I didn't miss them. Maybe I just chose not to see them because seeing them would have meant admitting I'd made a mistake, and I've never been good at that. I'm 68 years old now. I live in a small flat in Croydon that I'm renting month to month because I can't afford to buy anything anymore. I work 3 days a week doing bookkeeping for a plumbing company because my pension isn't enough. The woman I married, the woman I bought a house for, the woman I trusted with everything, mortgaged that house behind my back and disappeared with approximately £400,000 of my money. She was 30 when we met. I was 65. I'm not stupid enough to claim I didn't know what people thought when they saw us together. I just thought we were different. I thought I was different. I thought being careful with money my whole life meant I'd be careful with money when it mattered most. I was wrong about everything. My name is Gerald. I don't usually tell people my name when I tell this story because it feels too personal, too exposed, but I think I need to own it now. Gerald Hammond, 68 years old, divorced once, no children, retired chartered accountant, total liquid assets as of March 2023, £595,000, total liquid assets as of January 2025, approximately £42,000. I lost £553,000 in 22 months to a woman named Noon who told me she loved me and who I believed because I wanted to believe someone could love me at my age without wanting something from me. But she did want something from me. She wanted everything from me, and I gave it to her. I need to go back to explain how this happened. I need to explain who I was before Thailand, so you understand how someone like me could end up like this. I wasn't some lonely old man desperate for attention. I wasn't some sex tourist looking for a cheap thrill. I was methodical. I was careful. I was paranoid, actually. My ex-wife used to joke that I treated our marriage like a business audit. I checked every receipt. I tracked every expense. I knew where every pound went. It drove her mad. It's part of why we divorced. She said I loved spreadsheets more than I loved her, and maybe she was right. After the divorce, I had the house, I had my pension, I had my investments, and I had absolutely no desire to ever trust anyone with my money again. But I was also lonely. I think that's important to admit. I was 63 when my wife left, and I spent 2 years living alone in a 4-bedroom house in Bromley, going to work, coming home, watching television, going to bed. I had acquaintances. I had colleagues. I didn't have friends. Not really. I'd spent my whole life focused on work and my marriage, and when the marriage ended, I realized I had nothing else. No hobbies except golf, which I hated. No social life. No purpose beyond balancing other people's books. I retired at 64 with a generous pension and a lump sum from selling my share of the accounting firm. Combined with my savings and investments, I had just over £600,000. I sat in that empty house for 6 months and realized I had nowhere to go and nothing to do and possibly 30 more years of this ahead of me. That's when I started thinking about Thailand. I'd been to Thailand once before, a business trip to Bangkok in the 90s. I remembered it being hot and chaotic and completely overwhelming. But several of my former colleagues had retired there and they posted photos on Facebook of beaches and cheap beer and smiling Thai girlfriends and lives that looked infinitely better than mine. I wasn't naive about it. I knew what those relationships were. I knew those men were paying for companionship in one form or another. But I thought if I was careful, if I did my due diligence, if I approached it like a business transaction with clear boundaries and clear expectations, I could have something similar without getting taken advantage of. Looking back now, I realize how arrogant that sounds, how stupid, but at the time, it felt rational. It felt like a solution to a problem. I booked a 3-week holiday to Phuket in December 2022. I stayed at a mid-range hotel near Kata Beach, not one of the party areas, somewhere quiet where I could relax and think and maybe meet some other expats. I went to a few expat meetups at British pubs. I played golf at a course in Kathu. I ate dinner alone at beachfront restaurants and watched the sunset and felt something I hadn't felt in years, which was possibility. The weather was perfect. The cost of living was absurdly low compared to London. The Thai people I interacted with were friendly and polite. I started thinking, maybe this could work. Maybe I could actually live here. I met Noon on my second week there. She worked at the hotel, not as a receptionist like I initially thought, but as a sales coordinator for the hotel's real estate division. The hotel had a property development arm that sold condos and villas to foreigners, and Noon's job was to take potential buyers on tours and explain the investment opportunities. She was professional, well-dressed, spoke excellent English, and she wasn't working in a bar or a massage parlor or any of the places where I knew Western men met Thai women under questionable circumstances. That mattered to me. It made me feel like this was different, like she was different. She showed me several properties over the course of 3 days. She was patient with my questions, which were extensive. She explained Thai property law, the details of foreign ownership restrictions, the process for setting up a Thai company to hold land, the visa requirements for retirement. She gave me printed materials. She introduced me to a lawyer who worked with the development company. Everything felt legitimate and professional and above board. I didn't buy anything on that trip. I told her I needed to think about it, do more research, come back again. She said that was very sensible and gave me her business card and her line contact information in case I had questions. I went back to London feeling better than I had in years. I had a plan. I could sell my house in Bromley, take the money to Thailand, buy a small villa or condo, live comfortably on my pension, maybe do some consulting work to keep busy. I could have a life that wasn't just sitting alone in an empty house waiting to die. I started researching in earnest. I joined expat forums. I read horror stories about property scams and bar girl cons and foreigners losing everything to Thai partners. I told myself those men were idiots who rushed in without doing proper research. I told myself I was different because I was being careful. Noon and I stayed in touch via line. At first it was just property-related questions. She'd send me listings that matched what I was looking for. She'd answer questions about neighborhoods and amenities and resale values. But gradually the conversations became more personal. She told me about her life. She was from a small village near Udon Thani in Isan, the northeastern region of Thailand, which I'd learned was the poorest part of the country. She'd moved to Phuket 7 years earlier to work in tourism. She'd been married briefly to a Thai man who drank and gambled and hit her, and she'd left him and supported herself ever since. She sent money home to her mother every month. She had a younger brother who'd gotten into debt with some bad people, and she was helping him pay it off. She had nephews and nieces she adored. She showed me photos of her family, her village, the small wooden house where her mother lived. I remember feeling admiration for her. She'd come from nothing and built a decent life for herself through hard work and determination. She reminded me of myself in some ways, or at least the version of myself I wanted to believe in, self-made, resilient, practical. We started video calling. She was always cheerful, always asking about my day, always interested in my life in England. She laughed at my jokes. She called me handsome, which I knew was flattery but which I appreciated anyway because no one had called me handsome in approximately 30 years. She told me she liked older men because they were more mature and stable than Thai men her age. She said she'd dated a few Western men before, but they'd all been tourists who left after a few weeks and never came back, and she wanted something real, something lasting. She said she was tired of being alone. I told myself to be careful. I told myself this was probably a hustle, that she probably said these things to every lonely Western man who came through that hotel. But she never asked me for money. Not once in those 3 months of conversations did she ask for anything. That felt significant. That felt like proof that maybe this was real. I booked another trip to Phuket for March 2023. 3 weeks, same hotel. I told Noon I was coming. She seemed genuinely excited. She took time off work to spend with me. We had dinner together every night for the first week. She took me to local restaurants, not tourist places, and she translated the menus and ordered dishes she thought I'd like and paid for half the meals without me asking her to. We went to the beach. We talked for hours about everything and nothing. She held my hand in public, which surprised me. I'd expected Thai women to be more reserved, but she was affectionate in a way that felt natural, not performative. On the 9th day of that trip, we slept together for the first time. She came to my hotel room after dinner, and she stayed until morning. It wasn't transactional. I didn't pay her. She didn't ask for anything. Afterward, she lay with her head on my chest and told me she felt safe with me, which was perhaps the most intoxicating thing anyone had ever said to me. I was 65 years old, and a woman 35 years younger than me felt safe with me. I felt like I'd won something I didn't know I was competing for. By the end of that trip, we were talking about the future. She said she wanted to leave her job and start her own business, maybe a small guest house or a coffee shop. She said if I moved to Thailand, if we were together properly, she could manage our life here while I relaxed and enjoyed retirement. She said she knew how to deal with Thai bureaucracy, Thai contractors, Thai everything. She said I wouldn't have to worry about the logistics because she'd handle it all. She said all I needed to do was trust her. I told her I did trust her, which was partially true and partially me trying to convince myself it was true. Before I left Phuket, I gave her 50,000 baht, about 1,200 pounds. I told her it was to help with her brother's debt, that I wanted to help her family because she'd been so generous with her time. She cried and said no one had ever been so kind to her. She said she'd pay me back. I told her not to worry about it, that it was a gift. I realize now that was the test. That was her confirming I was the kind of person who would give her money without expecting documentation or repayment terms or any of the things I would have demanded in any other financial transaction in my life. I went back to London and put my house on the market. It sold in 6 weeks for £415,000. Combined with my other liquid assets, I now had just over £600,000 in cash. I started the process of wiring money to Thailand to buy property. I consulted with an immigration lawyer about retirement visas. I told my ex-wife I was moving to Thailand. She laughed and said I'd be back within a year, broke and embarrassed. I told her she didn't understand what I'd found there. I moved to Phuket permanently in July 2023. Noon helped me find a rental apartment while we looked for property to buy. She introduced me to a lawyer, a different one than the hotel had used, someone she said was more trustworthy and charged lower fees. His name was Prasert, and his office was in Phuket town, and he spoke reasonable English, and he explained that as a foreigner, I couldn't own land in Thailand, but I could own the structure built on the land, or I could form a Thai company with Noon as the majority shareholder, and the company could own the land. He said the second option was more common for people in our situation. He said many foreign men did this with their Thai wives or girlfriends. He made it sound completely normal. I should have asked more questions. I should have consulted with a lawyer back in England who had no stake in the transaction. I should have done so many things differently. But I was caught up in the excitement of starting a new life, and I trusted Noon, and Prasert seemed competent, and the paperwork all looked official. We formed a company called N&G Property Holdings Limited. Noon owned 51%. I owned 49%. The company would purchase land and build a house, and we'd live in it together, and if we eventually got married, which we were discussing, the ownership structure wouldn't matter anyway, because married couples shared assets. That's what I told myself. That's what Prasert told me. That's what Noon told me. We found a plot of land in Rawai, about 20 minutes from the beach, in a developing area that Noon said would appreciate in value. 1.5 rai, about 2,400 square meters. The asking price was 3.2 million baht, about 76,000 pounds. I thought that was reasonable. I wired the money from my UK bank account to the company account in Thailand. The land was purchased in August 2023 inches the name of N&G Property Holdings Limited. Then we started planning the house. Noon had ideas. She wanted 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, an open-plan kitchen and living area, a sala in the garden, a small swimming pool. She showed me sketches. She introduced me to a contractor, a friend of her cousin, who gave us a quote of 4.8 million baht for the full build, about £115,000. That seemed high to me, but Noon said that was the going rate for quality construction in Phuket, and the contractor spoke almost no English, so I had to rely on her translation during all our discussions. I asked if we should get other quotes. She said this contractor was reliable and trustworthy and her cousin's friend, and if we went with someone else we might have problems. I didn't want problems. I wanted to live in my house with my girlfriend and be happy. I wired another £120,000 to the company account in September 2023. We paid the contractor in installments, 30% upfront, 30% at foundation stage, 40% at completion. I never spoke directly to the contractor. Noon handled all of it. She took photos of the construction progress and showed them to me. She brought me to the site to inspect the work. Everything looked legitimate. The foundation went in, the walls went up, the roof went on. It looked like a house. It looked like our house. We moved into the rental apartment together in August. It felt like playing house, like we were a real couple, building a real life together. She cooked dinner most nights. She did the laundry. She managed the household finances because she understood Thai prices and could negotiate with vendors and landlords, and she said it was easier if she just handled it. I gave her access to the company bank account so she could pay construction bills and household expenses. I kept most of my money in my UK accounts, transferring as needed. I wasn't completely stupid. I was being careful, or at least I thought I was being careful. Noon's family started having emergencies around October 2023. First, her mother needed cataract surgery. 25,000 baht, about £600. I paid for it without hesitation, because what kind of person wouldn't help their girlfriend's mother see properly? Then her brother's debt situation got worse. The people he owed money to were threatening him. Another 60,000 baht, about £1,400. Then her niece needed school fees and uniforms, 15,000 baht. Then the roof on her mother's house collapsed during a storm and needed repairs, 40,000 baht. Then her nephew had a motorbike accident and the hospital bill was 30,000 baht. I kept a spreadsheet. I always keep spreadsheets. Between August and December 2023, I gave Noon approximately 190,000 baht for various family emergencies, about £4,500. Each time she cried and thanked me and promised to pay me back someday. Each time I told her not to worry about it, that I was happy to help because I loved her and I wanted her family to be okay. I realize now how that sounds. I realize I was being taken advantage of, but in the moment, each individual expense seemed reasonable and urgent and temporary. Her mother really did need cataract surgery. I saw the hospital paperwork. Her brother really was in debt. I saw the threatening messages on her phone. At least I saw screenshots of messages in Thai that she told me were threats. Every emergency had documentation, had a story, had emotional weight behind it, and Noon never asked frivolously. She always seemed reluctant, embarrassed, apologetic. She always presented it as a last resort. The house was completed in January 2024. It looked beautiful, exactly what we'd planned. White walls, dark wood trim, floor-to-ceiling windows, a small infinity pool in the back garden overlooking a view of palm trees and distant hills. The furniture arrived. The appliances were installed. We moved in on January 15, 2024. Noon cried with happiness. She said she'd never lived in a real house before, that she'd grown up in a wooden shack with a corrugated roof and no proper bathroom, and now she lived in a house with a pool and air conditioning in every room. She said I'd changed her life. She said she'd spend the rest of her life making me happy. I believed her. I wanted to believe her. We settled into domestic life. I cooked breakfast, she cooked dinner. I worked on getting my retirement visa sorted, which required extensive documentation and regular trips to immigration in Phuket town. Noon came with me to translate. We went to the beach on weekends. We had friends over. Other expats Noon had introduced me to through her work connections. We were, by all appearances, a happy couple, living a comfortable life in paradise. But things started changing around March 2024. Small things at first. Noon spent more time on her phone. She took calls outside, speaking in rapid Thai that I couldn't follow even though I'd been taking Thai language lessons and could now recognize basic phrases. She seemed distracted during dinner. She was less affectionate, less interested in sex, more irritable when I asked questions about where she'd been or who she'd been talking to. I told myself it was stress. She was adjusting to not working, to being financially dependent on me, to living in a house with an aging foreign man. I told myself to give her space. I told myself this was normal, that all relationships had phases. Then in April, the family emergencies intensified. Her brother needed a loan to start a small business selling fried chicken, 60,000 baht. Her mother needed dental work, 40,000 baht. Her sister's husband left her and she needed money for her kids, 50,000 baht. Her cousin needed help with a down payment on a motorbike for work, 35,000 baht. By June 2024, I'd given Noon approximately 380,000 baht for family issues, in addition to the earlier emergencies, another 9,000 pounds on top of the previous 4,500. I was starting to feel uncomfortable. I still had plenty of money in my UK accounts, approximately 350,000 pounds, but I was burning through it faster than I'd planned. I'd budgeted for property purchase and construction, and maybe 20,000 pounds of miscellaneous expenses over the first 2 years. I was already at 180,000 pounds spent, and we hadn't even been together a full year. I tried to talk to Noon about it in July. I said I was happy to help her family, but we needed to have a budget, we needed to track expenses, we needed to make sure we weren't overextending ourselves. She got angry. She said I was being cheap, that Thai culture meant taking care of family, that if I really loved her I'd understand that her family's well-being was her responsibility. She said I had plenty of money and she had nothing, that everything was in my name anyway, so why was I worried? That comment stuck with me. Everything was in my name anyway. Except it wasn't, was it? The house was owned by the company, and she owned 51% of the company. But I was the one who'd paid for everything. Surely that meant something legally. Surely I was protected. I started looking more closely at the company documents in August 2024. I'm not sure what triggered it exactly. Maybe it was the argument we'd had. Maybe it was the vague anxiety I'd been feeling for months that something wasn't quite right. Maybe it was just my old accountant paranoia reasserting itself after being dormant for too long. I went through all the paperwork Prassard had given us when we formed the company, articles of association, shareholder agreements, bank account opening documents. Everything looked in order. The company owned the land. The company had paid for the construction. Noon and I were the 2 shareholders. Everything was documented. But then I noticed something strange in the bank statements for the company account. There was a monthly deduction of 18,000 baht, about 430 pounds, that had started in February 2024, shortly after we moved into the house. It was labeled as a payment to Krung Thai Bank. I didn't remember authorizing any regular payments to Krung Thai. I asked Noon about it. She said it was property tax or some kind of mandatory local fee. She said she'd mentioned it to me before and I'd approved it. I didn't remember that conversation, but I also didn't trust my memory completely. I was 66 years old. I forgot things sometimes. Maybe she had mentioned it and I'd forgotten. Maybe I was being paranoid. But I couldn't let it go. 18,000 baht a month for 8 months was 144,000 baht, about 3,400 pounds. That wasn't an insignificant amount. I wanted to know what it was for. In September 2024, while Noon was out visiting her mother in Udon Thani for a week, I went to the Rawai land office. I took our property documents with me. I hired a translator, a university student I found through an online forum, to come with me and help me communicate. I told the land office staff I wanted to check the status of the land title deed for our property. I wanted to verify there were no issues, no liens, no problems that might affect the title. The woman at the counter looked at the documents, typed something into her computer, and then her expression changed. She printed several pages and showed them to my translator, speaking in Thai. My translator's face went pale. He turned to me. He said there was a mortgage on the property, a mortgage for 2.4 million baht, about 57,000 pounds, taken out in March 2024, 1 month after we'd moved in. The mortgage was in the name of N&G Property Holdings Limited. The loan was from Krung Thai Bank. The monthly payment was 18,000 baht. I think I stopped breathing for a moment. The room felt like it was tilting. I asked the translator to confirm what he'd just said. He showed me the papers. There it was in black and white. A mortgage I'd never authorized, never signed, never even knew existed, on a house I'd paid for entirely with my own money. I don't remember driving back to the house. I don't remember the motorbike taxis and the tuk-tuks and the tourists and the traffic. I just remember sitting in the living room of the house I'd built, staring at the mortgage documents, trying to understand how this had happened. The monthly payments matched the mysterious deductions I'd noticed in the company bank account. Noon had been paying a mortgage I didn't know about with money from the company account that I'd funded. She'd taken out a mortgage on a property that was owned by a company she controlled, and she'd done it without my knowledge or consent. I'd paid for the land and the construction outright, £190,000, and she'd somehow managed to mortgage it for an additional £57,000, and I had no idea where that money had gone. I tried to think rationally about what this meant. Noon had signing authority on the company account because I'd given it to her. She was the majority shareholder of the company, 51%, which meant she had control. Maybe she could legally take out a mortgage in the company's name without my signature. Maybe Thai corporate law allowed that. Maybe Prasert had explained this to me and I hadn't understood because the legal terminology was confusing and I'd been too focused on the romance to pay attention to the details. But even if it was legal, even if she had the authority to do it, she'd done it behind my back. She'd hidden it from me for 6 months. She'd lied about what the monthly payments were for. She'd taken out a loan secured against a property I'd fully funded, and she'd used that money for something she hadn't told me about. I felt sick. I felt betrayed. I felt stupid. I felt exactly the way I used to feel when I'd discover fraud in a client's accounts, and I'd have to explain to them that their business partner had been stealing from them, and they'd ask me how they could have been so blind. And I'd have to tell them that trust makes people blind. Noon came back from Udon Thani 3 days later. I was waiting for her in the living room with the mortgage documents spread on the coffee table. She walked in with her suitcase and saw my face and saw the papers, and she froze. I asked her to explain. I kept my voice calm. I didn't shout. I just asked her to explain why there was a mortgage on the house that I didn't know about. She sat down. She didn't cry, not yet. She just looked at the papers and then looked at me and said, in a very quiet voice, that her brother had needed money. He'd gotten into worse debt with dangerous people, loan sharks who were threatening to hurt him. She'd needed to get cash quickly, and the only way to do that was to take out a mortgage on the house. She said she'd been planning to tell me, but she was afraid I'd say no, and she couldn't let her brother get hurt, so she'd done it without asking. She said she was sorry. She said she'd pay it back. I asked her how much money her brother had needed. She said 2 million baht. I asked where the other 400,000 baht had gone. She didn't answer for a long time. Then she said her mother had needed a new house, that the old one was falling apart and it wasn't safe, and she'd used part of the money to build her mother a new house. She said she'd thought I'd be happy about that I'd want her mother to have a decent place to live. I asked why she hadn't asked me. I asked why, if her brother was really in danger and her mother really needed a new house, she hadn't just come to me and explained the situation. I asked why she'd felt the need to take out a secret mortgage on property I'd paid for. She started crying then. She said I didn't understand Thai culture. She said I didn't understand how family worked here, how much pressure there was to take care of your parents and siblings, how impossible it was to say no when someone needed help. She said she'd been afraid I wouldn't understand, that I'd be angry, that I'd think she was using me. She said she loved me, and she'd been trying to handle everything on her own so I wouldn't have to worry. I wanted to believe her. I wanted this to be a cultural misunderstanding, a mistake born from desperation and good intentions. But I couldn't ignore the fact that she'd forged my signature, or used her authority as majority shareholder to bypass my approval, or however she'd legally managed to mortgage the property. I couldn't ignore the fact that she'd been lying to me for 6 months about what those monthly payments were for. I couldn't ignore the fact that I'd discovered this completely by accident, that if I hadn't happened to notice the bank statements and happened to follow up with the land office, I might never have known. I told her I needed time to think. I told her I was going to stay with a friend in Patong for a few days. I packed a bag and left. She didn't try to stop me. I stayed with an expat named Tom, a British guy about my age who I'd met at a golf club. I told him everything. He listened without interrupting, and then he said, very gently, that I needed to get a Thai lawyer immediately, not Prassert, someone independent, and I needed to find out exactly what my legal position was. He said from what I'd described, Noon had effective control of the company and therefore control of the property, and there might not be much I could do about it. He said he knew 3 different men who'd been in similar situations, and all 3 had lost everything because they'd put assets in their girlfriend's name thinking love would protect them. I hired a lawyer in Phuket town the next day. Her name was Sutita, and she spoke fluent English, and she charged 3,000 baht for the consultation, about 72 pounds. I showed her all the documents, the company formation papers, the land title deed, the mortgage documents, the bank statements, everything. She looked through it all very carefully, and then she explained my situation. Because the company was Thai-owned, meaning Noon had majority control, and because the mortgage had been taken out in the company's name with the signature of the majority shareholder, it was likely legal under Thai law. The bank would have required the company's seal and the majority shareholder's signature, but not necessarily the minority shareholder's signature. I should have been notified as a shareholder, but if Noon had access to all the company documents and correspondence went to an address she controlled, she could have intercepted any notifications. The fact that I'd contributed all the capital to the company didn't matter. What mattered was who had legal control, and that was Noon. Sutita asked if I'd signed any documents I didn't understand. I told her I'd signed dozens of documents, all in Thai, during the company formation and property purchase and house construction. She said that was the problem. I might have signed something giving Noon broader authority than I realized. I might have signed something waiving my notification rights. I might have signed documents that effectively gave her complete control while I'd thought we were equal partners. She said she'd need to review everything in detail to give me proper advice, but based on what she'd seen, my options were limited. I could try to dissolve the company, but that would require Noon's agreement since she had majority control. I could try to force a sale of the property, but again, that would require her cooperation or a court order, and Thai courts moved slowly and didn't always favor foreigners in domestic disputes. I could file a complaint for fraud, but I'd need to prove she'd deliberately deceived me, and if she could show that I'd signed documents authorizing her actions, even if I hadn't understood them, prosecution would be difficult. She asked if I was married to Noon. I said no. We'd talked about it but never actually done it. She said that was at least one thing in my favor. If we'd been married, the situation would be even more complicated. She estimated that fully investigating my legal position and attempting to recover my assets would cost somewhere between 300,000 and 1 million baht in legal fees, about 7,000 to 24,000 pounds, with no guarantee of success. She said the most likely outcome was that I'd spend a lot of money on lawyers and end up with nothing anyway. I left her office and I sat in a coffee shop on Thepkasatri Road and I did the calculation. I'd spent approximately 320,000 pounds on the property and construction and furnishing. I'd spent approximately 14,000 pounds on family emergencies and loans. I'd spent approximately 4,000 pounds on visa fees and legal fees and moving costs and miscellaneous expenses. Total, approximately 338,000 pounds over 18 months. The house was worth maybe 4 million baht, about 95,000 pounds, if I could sell it. But it had a mortgage of 2.4 million baht against it. So the net equity was 1.6 million baht, about 38,000 pounds. And I couldn't sell it without Noon's agreement because she controlled the company that owned it. I'd lost 300,000 pounds, maybe more. And I had absolutely no legal recourse that wouldn't cost me everything I had left. I went back to the house 3 days after I'd left. Noon was there. She'd been crying, I could tell, but she didn't cry when she saw me. She just looked at me and waited for me to speak. I told her I knew about everything. I told her I'd consulted with a lawyer and I knew I had no legal way to force her to do anything. I told her I knew I'd been a fool to put everything in a company she controlled. I told her I knew she'd planned this from the beginning, or at least she'd taken advantage of the opportunity when it presented itself. She didn't deny it. She just said, very quietly, that I'd known what I was getting into. She said all the old Farang know that Thai women are with them for money. That's just how it works. And I'd known that, and I'd been okay with it as long as I could pretend it was love. She said I'd gotten what I wanted for 18 months, a beautiful young girlfriend who cooked and cleaned and slept with me, and she'd gotten what she wanted, a house for her family and money for her brother and security for her mother. She said that was the deal, even if I hadn't wanted to admit it to myself. She said if I wanted to leave, I could leave. She wouldn't stop me. But the house was hers now, legally and fairly, and she was going to keep it. She said I should have been smarter. She said I should have known better. I think that's what broke me. Not the money, not the betrayal, but the fact that she was right. I should have known better. I'd spent 40 years as an accountant, catching people doing exactly what she'd done to me, and I'd walked right into it anyway because I'd wanted to believe I was special, that our relationship was special, that I was different from all the other old men who got scammed by young Thai women. I moved out the next week. I found a small studio apartment in Chalong, about 15 minutes from the house, for 8,000 baht a month. I canceled my retirement visa extension because I no longer met the financial requirements. I had approximately £45,000 left in my UK accounts after paying Sutita and booking my flight back to England and settling various bills. I was 67 years old and I was going back to England with less money than I'd had at age 30. I didn't see Noon again before I left. I heard from Tom that she had a new boyfriend, a Dutch man in his 70s who'd recently moved to Phuket. I heard she was showing him properties, helping him navigate Thai bureaucracy, making him feel special and understood. I wanted to warn him. I wanted to find him and tell him to run, but what would be the point? He'd think I was bitter. He'd think his situation was different. He'd think he was smarter than me. I've been back in England for 7 months now. I'm living in a 1-bedroom flat in Croydon that costs £850 a month. I'm working part-time doing bookkeeping for a plumbing company, 3 days a week, £200 a week, because my pension is only £1,200 a month, and that's not enough to live on. I'm 68 years old and I'm essentially starting my financial life over. I think about Thailand every day. Not Noon specifically, though I think about her too. I think about the house I built. I think about sitting by the pool in the evening with a cold beer, watching the sun set over the palm trees. I think about feeling, for a brief moment, like I had a purpose, like I mattered to someone, like I'd found a way to be happy in the last decades of my life. I know now that was all an illusion. I know Noon never loved me. I know every affectionate gesture, every smile, every time she called me handsome or said she felt safe with me. That was all part of extracting as much money as possible before I caught on. I know that. Intellectually, I know that. But I also know that for 18 months, I was happy, stupidly happy, blindly happy. I was happy in a way I hadn't been since before my marriage fell apart, maybe happy in a way I'd never been. And I'm not sure how to reconcile that. I'm not sure how to feel about the fact that the happiest period of my adult life was based entirely on a lie. I think that's what I struggle with most. Not the money, though the money hurts. Not the betrayal, though that hurts too. But the realization that I valued the fantasy more than the truth. I saw the warning signs. I did see them. The excessive family emergencies, the financial requests, the way Noon always seemed to need just a bit more, the fact that I was signing documents I didn't understand. I saw all of that. But I rationalized it away because the alternative was admitting I was being scammed, and admitting that would have meant ending the relationship, and ending the relationship would have meant going back to being alone. So I chose the fantasy. I chose to believe her. I chose to ignore the evidence right in front of me because the truth was too painful. I don't blame Noon, not really. She did what she needed to do to survive, to take care of her family, to build security in a country where security is hard to come by. She saw an opportunity and she took it. She's not a monster. She's just a woman who grew up with nothing and found a way to get something. I blame myself. I blame myself for being so desperate for companionship that I ignored every instinct I'd developed over 40 years in accounting. I blame myself for putting love ahead of logic. I blame myself for thinking I was different, special, immune to the same traps that catch thousands of Western men in Thailand every year. If you're reading this and you're thinking about doing what I did, if you're thinking about moving to Thailand and buying property with a Thai partner and building a life with someone decades younger than you, I can't stop you. No one could have stopped me. Tom tried. Other expats tried. My ex-wife tried. I didn't listen because I didn't want to listen. But I'll tell you what I wish someone had told me, or what I wish I'd listened to when they did tell me. It doesn't matter how careful you think you're being. It doesn't matter how much due diligence you do. It doesn't matter how many lawyers you consult or how many documents you sign or how many spreadsheets you keep. If you're putting assets in someone else's name, if you're creating corporate structures where you don't have final control, if you're trusting someone to handle your money when there's a massive power imbalance in the relationship, you are going to lose. Not might lose, going to lose. It's just a question of when and how much. The rules aren't different in Thailand. The rules are exactly the same as anywhere else. Money and power go together. And if you give someone power over your money, they will eventually use it. No matter how much they say they love you, no matter how much you believe you're different from everyone else who got scammed before you. I was a chartered accountant for 40 years. I caught fraud for a living. I knew better, and I lost 300,000 pounds anyway. Don't be like me. Don't think you're different. Don't think you're special. Don't think love will protect you. It won't.